Ethanol, the fuel of the future. On the right side of the screen, we have ethanol's Lewis structure, as well as its molecular structure, and we have our table of contents. Ethanol background. Fuel ethanol is a denatured anhydrous alcohol, meaning that the substance itself does not have a large amount of water and was produced with additives in order to become non-consumable. These additives are labeled as denaturants and are used in order to make fuel ethanol undrinkable, unlike regular ethanol, which is found in alcohols. Its primary use is to serve as spark ignition for engines, with nearly all of total motor gasoline in the US containing at least 10% ethanol per volume, called E10. All vehicles in the US can use this type of fuel, specifically E10, while some other heavy-duty vehicles can process higher amounts. The image on the right basically depicts this labeling, with the gasoline pump being labeled unleaded E10. The E represents the ethanol, and the 10 represents the total percentage of ethanol in the gas. How ethanol is grown/cultivated. Fuel ethanol is produced by fermenting sugar and starches such as corn, sorghum, sugarcane/beets, and barley. For the US, most if not all fuel ethanol is made with corn kernel starch. However, there have been researchers who have produced fuel ethanol with agricultural residues, grass, biomass and solid waste, and willow trees. The ethanol made with these are specifically called cellulosic ethanol and are considered an advanced type of biofuel. The image on the right basically shows the basic components that go into making the fuel ethanol. It's obviously a little bit more complicated than that, but we're going to get into that in the next slide. How ethanol is produced. Fuel ethanol is produced through the fermentation of sugars/starches, such as the ones previously listed. These plants store energy through photosynthesis and use sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide to convert into sugars and starches. Microorganisms convert these into ethanol through fermentation. Ethanol is then distilled in order to become anhydrous, which means water-free. It will then be denatured so it can become non-consumable, ultimately being blended with gasoline to turn into E10. This graph basically shows this entire process from, in this scenario, obtaining the corn kernel starch all the way to shipping it. And in between, we have the denaturing and the solution, which is basically used to remove as much water as possible. Developmental status of ethanol. Fuel ethanol is very available to the public in the US, as it can be found in gasoline. In fact, the US alone consumed 14 billion gallons of fuel ethanol in 2022, a 12 million gallon increase from 1981. Overall, the ethanol industry has developed greatly over the years, and ethanol was approved to be a renewable energy. This trend on the right basically shows the increase all the way from 1981 to 2022. The orange depicts the total increase in percentage, and the blue represents the total increase in gallons by billions. Impact of ethanol on carbon footprint. Overall, fuel ethanol has a more positive impact on carbon footprint than other biofuels. It displaces regular gasoline in blends like E10, where gasoline has a total percentage of 10% ethanol, which reduces fossil fuel consumption. It is also considered a renewable energy source because of its method of production, since it comes from plants. However, fuel ethanol does not have as much energy as gasoline. In fact, it only has about 67 of the total energy content of gasoline. On the right, we have some facts about fuel ethanol and its effect on carbon emissions, such that it's a renewable energy, it's a cleaner fuel, and it's a low carbon fuel. Economic impact of ethanol. Fuel ethanol is very major in the US, especially in the Midwest. Its overall production has increased in the billions each year, with the US even exporting 1.3 billion gallons to other countries, approximately 83. It has had a positive impact on the economy, especially because it has opened so many job opportunities. This graph basically shows the main states that produce fuel ethanol. Use of ethanol to the public. Ethanol has become very well known to the public, with gasoline pumps being labeled with ethanol percentage for buyers to understand the ethanol content. These labeling regulations were made in order for consumers to know which vehicles can use it, which is mostly all. It is also highly promoted to the public because it's a renewable energy. We also have an image that depicts these labelings that are mandated. Analysis. Overall, I believe fuel ethanol is a more widely acceptable alternative to the regular fuels such as gasoline. It can be ethically produced without having as much harm to the environment, and the US has seemed to understand this since they're one of the main producers of fuel ethanol. I also believe that its production has a positive impact both economically and environmentally. More than anything, I think that it's a good biofuel as long as it's ethically used rather than primarily for financial gain. There shouldn't be a monopolization of the industry, and there should definitely be regulations to keep this in place. Action plan. First off, there should be an investment in research to reduce the cost of production. There could also be more inclusion for farmer participation in producing and acquiring the starches and sugars needed to make ethanol. And most importantly, there should be stronger policies for ethanol. Though there are already policies in place, you can never be too sure. This could be a policy that boosts market fairness. A policy like this could have price transparency between producers and consumers so they know that they're not overspending, and even federal regulations that prevent long-term supply being primarily from large companies and instead small ones, since the current producers of fuel ethanol are large corporations that are deeply rooted in the oil industry. Citations. I also included a funny image. And yeah, thank you.